Okay, let's do this. Oh my goodness. Look at that. Just a couple subscribers away from 16,000. Whew. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my all-time favorite artists. Today we're going to be looking at the art of Franklin Carmichael, and this painting we are going to study and recreate here from 1929 called Mirror Lake. And Franklin Carmichael was one of the original members of the Group of Seven, Canada's most famous group of artists, visual artists, and the youngest of all of the members, roughly about 5 to 10 years younger than the next youngest artist in the group. I think A.J. Canson was also pretty young too, but anyway, this is, I just love this painting, and I'll just say right off the top, like 20 minutes ago, even though I got everything ready, I found on the National Gallery's website this version of the image, and obviously the colors are a little bit different. I think this is the real painting, but this is sort of what the colors look like in every single image I found before that. So it's your pick as to which version of this painting you want to do, whether it's the very, very saturated color version or the much more muted palette of this one. Honestly, I like this one, so this is the version that I'm going to do, but you'll have the options. I'll put both copies there in the Dropbox for you to play with. In fact, let me just do that right now. Okay. That way people can have both access to them. So let's look at the plan of attack today. We are going to get the image onto the canvas. We're going to stain the canvas with a little bit of color. Then we're going to talk about who Franklin Carmichael was. We'll do, I don't think we're going to do the underpainting. We're just going to go right to the background, work it a little bit there, the foreground, back and forth. Probably a couple times. This painting is a little bit more complex, so it's probably going to be a slightly longer one, maybe about the 3-hour version. So if you're watching this video long after it was recorded, you can just jump right to there's timestamps in the video below. You can just jump right to that, and you can just see, did I do a good job? Is it worth your time to try to replicate this painting or not? If not, then thanks so much for watching. And we'll see you in the next episode. But if you do find it useful or anything that we cover here of interest or educational, please strongly consider liking the video, hit the subscribe button, and that little notification bell. There's a couple bonus episodes that are going to be coming down the pipeline over the holidays, so you want to make sure you don't miss those. As well as if you want to leave a small donation, as little as $1 as the price of a cup of coffee, please consider making a donation through PayPal. You can use the super chat function here directly in YouTube. You can contact me through my email or the Facebook group. And I'll just kind of point that out. I strongly encourage you to join the Facebook group, take a photograph of your artwork and upload it to the Facebook group so that you can get feedback from other artists as well as myself. Once a month I go through this and I take all of the images off here, not just the stuff we're doing in class, but things that inspire other people that they're creating on their own. And I celebrate the work and offer a few little pointers on how to improve, because I think that's what everybody wants to do, is to get better, right? So let's go right to the front here, to our first step. I see Pascaline says, it's midnight here in the UK and I just came back from laparoscopy operation. Watching your tutorial is soothing. Oh my goodness. I'm so glad that you're doing okay, and I'm so excited that that this is your way of recovering from that surgery, and hopefully we'll keep you entertained. And Iman says, hi, I'm so excited today. Nelson says it's 5:30 a.m. in India. Pascaline says, wants to do the saturated. And Cam Gway says, this is the first time I've made it to the live stream. Thank you for your content. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Let's go right into it. So the first thing here is we've got to get an image onto the canvas. Now, you could just draw this out. You could sketch it out. But I've done a free template that you can download from the Dropbox. So, and I'll show you how to get this onto the canvas. So, in the description for the video here below, you will see a link to the Dropbox folder. And at the very top is our very, very early, most basic introductory how to paint episodes and the tools for that. And then you're going to see about 40 folders here that begin with a letter. And these are all our most simple paintings. Today is maybe a little bit more of a slightly more complex painting, perhaps. Or maybe it's just going to take a little bit longer than some of those easier ones. And then you're going to see a whole bunch of, you know, another 160 or so folders that are a little bit more complicated. So if you kind of feel that this might be too easy, well, don't worry, there's plenty of stuff like the Mona Lisa down there if you're interested that can keep you plenty occupied. So if we click in here, you'll see that there's now 4 images. We have the 2 different versions of Carmichael's original painting and then my version of the outline. So I'll just show that to you here. So we got this version, which I just found, and the outline, as well as it's in JPEG and PDF format, whatever's easier for you to print out on your printer at home. So let's get to it here. I've got a 9x12 sized canvas. I like this this brand. I found them to be pretty good. They withstand warping. They sometimes get a little bit, if you get too much water on cheap canvas boards, they'll warp. But these ones do a pretty good job. I've also covered it with an extra coat of gesso. So it comes white, or pre-gessoed as they call it. And then I put another layer of gesso on it and then sanded it because I like it to be really smooth. Now, one of the things that I have sometimes a habit of doing is just stacking them when they're all dry. And then sometimes they stick together, and that's what this is. It's when I peeled them apart, it pulled off some of the gesso. So you might want to think about, as I have done, I don't know why I didn't do it here, I use wax paper or parchment paper to separate them. Or actually, that's what I used to use. I actually now use glassine. Glassine is like, it's like, well, there's different kinds of glassine. Some of them look a lot like wax paper, and then some of them have, they're intended really for like archivists to archive photographs and keep the photographs from sticking. And you know, actually it's a lot more like this, like tissue paper, quite frankly. Anyway, what I'm using here is carbon transfer paper or graphite transfer paper. Virtually the same thing, just slightly different material, but they do the same thing. And I'm just going to put this sheet under here. You always want to make sure you're putting the shiny side down, right? Shiny side down, because that's what's got the carbon on it. And it's a good idea just to make sure you've got it on the right side. And there you go. You can see the line coming through. So I'm not going to spend too long on this because I'm going to cover all of these lines shortly. So I just want the most important lines on here. And I know it's like, how do I know what the most important lines are? Well, you can kind of just see a little bit what I'm doing. You can see that I'm going to just draw through some areas here, like these trees. Because again, I'm just going to paint right through them. And I also sort of kind of jump around back and forth when I'm doing these outlines, which I suppose might create the possibility that I forget a few lines. But as I said, my goal is not to get all of the lines perfectly done. It's just to kind of get the major shapes in here so that when I'm painting, I have a pretty good idea of where everything, quote-unquote, goes. what the composition is. It's also interesting that every image I had seen previously of this painting showed, I thought the tops of this mountain were being cropped from the original, like and it must have been just maybe the way it was framed, and maybe the images I've seen are based on photographs that people took in the museum. But when it's out of the frame, which is what the image on the National Gallery has, because you could see the kind of the edges where the paint doesn't go right to the edge of the paint of the paper, because this is actually a watercolor painting, not a oil painting. That maybe when it's out of the frame, you can see the actual tops of these hills. So in the way that I'm painting it now, there'll be a little bit of room right at the top there for those hills. Let's do 5 more lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's painter's 5 lines, right? Okay, there we go. That's good enough. Okay, let's just get to work here. So, I'm going to keep this. I like to keep these just kind of a little bit out of, not out of view, but out of view for you, but just in front of me here. So if I have to refer to something, I don't have to look at the computer screen. It's just right next to me. Okay, all done. Susan says, you are an amazing teacher. I've been doing the drawing course and I've made so much progress. Thank you. I'm not ready to start painting yet, but I saw you were live, so I jumped on to say hello. Thank you so much, Susan. That's so sweet. Itala says, hi from the UK. I can't believe it. First time here. I just found you on YouTube. Yay! That's great. Nice to see you. M. Taylor says, I hope your recovery is speedy and complete, Pascaline. And Pascaline says, thank you. Yes, we're all wishing you best. We're sending you good vibes today. Okay. So our next step here is the Imprimatura. Say it with me, everybody. Imprimatura. Imprimatura is the first layer of paint, or the first paint. And we think of it as a priming layer to get the painting started. Most of the time, artists would either use a warm reddish brown, often either that or painting directly onto like a cedar panel, which already has kind of got, you know, a reddish hue to it to begin with. Now, those of you that have been watching for a long time know that I do something a little bit different, which is I use a warm yellow. Now, if you're watching for the first time, you're like, okay, that sounds new to me. What does a warm yellow mean? Well, let's look at the palette that I'm actually using here. So this is the brand of paint. I'm not paid or sponsored. I bought all my supplies at regular price, just like every other person. And this is the one that I recommend for a student to paint with. And so I'm going to be using this Azo Yellow Deep here in just a few minutes. And you can see that this is a limited palette. That's, you know, you might say, wow, that's 8 tubes of paint. That's limited. Well, there are certainly lots of people who buy 30 tubes of paint or 40. I get all these inundated with Black Friday deals, and it's like 48 tubes of paint for whatever price. It's like, yeah, but why would anybody need all those tubes when you can make all these colors with just 8? Anyway, if you want to use a different brand that might be a little bit higher grade of quality, what we call professional grade instead of student grade, you can use Golden. Golden is higher quality. It's maybe twice as, well, maybe not even twice as good. It's maybe like 30% better for 400 times the price. So a tube of paint like this from Amsterdam, which is like 12 bucks, you will get one that's less than half the size for 30 bucks. So it's up to you. And these are the colors I would recommend with that brand. Liquitex, here's their student grade paint. Here's Winsor & Newton. Artist Loft from Michael's Art Supply chain of stores. Buzz, Peebo, Holbein, Daler-Rowney, Fevicryl, Nova Color, Chroma Color, and not Museum Color from Toronto. I'm sorry, Museum Color. You just put, I don't know why you're putting that white in all of those colors. It just makes it impossible to make our blacks as we like to use it. So anyway, let's get some of this paint onto the palette here. So here's my water. I'm going to put a little bit of water in here. This is the only time I use water when I'm painting with acrylic paint. And I mean, that's the ideal way of going about things. There are plenty of people who use water all the time, and plenty of people in our community who use water all the time. It doesn't bother me. If it works for you, by all means, keep doing it. The only reason you don't really want to use water is, you know, we use water for cleaning our brushes, and the water is going to break down the bonds of the paint. So it can give a kind of a grainy texture to the paint because basically paint is pigment, and that's usually kind of like a powder mixed with it is mixed with a medium, basically it's this acrylic, which is a lot like white glue. So if you imagine just diluting white glue, the glue becomes less sticky and it's not going to hold things as well. So the question is, well, then why are we doing it now? Well, because, as I mentioned before, this surface is covered with gesso, and gesso is a plaster based, well, it's acrylic medium with plaster, and so the plaster absorbs water really well. And so basically what we're doing is staining the canvas. And I love using this warm yellow, and I don't, this is sort of my own thing that I arrived at while doing these episodes, that I just found works. It's faster because I can just squeeze paint right out of the tube and get started, and I don't have to mix a brown. And I have done that many times just to show people the difference. I can't remember the last time I did it. I think I did that when we did the Bertha Morisot painting about a month ago. I did one in brown in the traditional process, and I used my yellow, and by the end they're almost identical. So you can watch that video, go right to the end, and you can decide for yourself whether it's worth mixing that color or just going right to the yellow, as I'm doing. Busgus says, is that gouache? No, this is acrylic paint. Although, you know, the idea of using gouache isn't too far out, because the original painting was created in watercolor, which I know is not gouache, and acrylic is not watercolor either. But we're going to get very similar effects to what Carmichael got with the watercolor. And gouache is, that's a really fun medium to try, because it's sort of like between acrylic and watercolor, in that it is very opaque, and yet it kind of has the ease of painting that maybe some people find watercolor to be. And it also, a lot of illustrators use gouache. Gouache is probably the paint that is preferred most by illustrators, at least traditional illustrators. A lot of people use computers now. Okay. And there's Pascal answering all the questions on my behalf there. Thank you, Pascal. You're the champ. Okay, I'm just going to get a little bit of paint on my palette here before I move on. Where can I put you? Let's put you here. So here's my 6 colors that I'm applying here, and you'll see that there's 2 yellows, 2 blues, 2 reds, and 2 yellows, 2 blues, and 2 reds. And some white. White is probably the most commonly used color ultimately. Got that. Oh, we want. And probably my cool red, I would say, is often the color I use least. So, white and warm yellow, the 2 most common colors, probably followed by cool yellow, warm red, and cool blue. And then followed by warm blue, and last and least, cool red. And really probably the reason why is that those 2 colors make purple most really saturated purple, but how often do artists actually use a super saturated purple? Less often. Now, I'm not saying you should just run out and just buy these 4 colors and be done with it, as well as white, because it's not like I don't use them, I'm just saying I use them less. So, because without that, then you're really preventing yourself from a whole, third of the color wheel. Okay, long story short, let's move on to our next step here. Let's bring this back. Okay, so now that we've got our canvas started, we got an image on there, we've got the Imprimatura applied, and we're just going to wait for that to dry. While that's happening, let's check in with the biography of Franklin Carmichael. So Franklin Carmichael's born in 1890 and dies in 1945. As I said, he was younger than all the other group of 7 members, or at least the original group of 7 members. And many of them were born in the 1870s or 1880s. So I think that's helpful to remember, because he did see himself as a little bit on the outside of that group, and one of the reasons why he sort of went his own way eventually. So he is born in Orillia, Ontario, which is about halfway between Toronto and Algonquin Park. And Algonquin Park is considered to be northern Ontario, but if you're living in the Yukon, you would say that looks pretty southern to me, I suppose. I've always found that kind of funny. But anyway, so Algonquin Park becomes a place that Carmichael visits quite frequently at a certain point. So he's sort of not a farm boy like his friend Tom Thompson, but he's also not a big city kid like some of the other fellows in the group. He grows up in this small town and displays an interest in art at a young age. And one of the things that he does is he starts working in his father's carriage shop, right? Horse carriages were the vehicle of the day. So young Franklin Carmichael is given the opportunity to decorate those horse carriages in his father's shop, and is able to apply his skills in that fashion. And at the age of, what would that be? At the age of 20, probably 19, he goes to Toronto. He moves down to the big city, and he studies at what is now known as the Ontario College of Art. And a couple of people he studies with, William Cruikshank and George Reed, that's significant because Cruikshank, it's interesting. He is the artist that many of the group of 7, or the members of what becomes the group of 7, and other artists in Toronto study with at some point. So he's sort of this very influential figure who is not, I wouldn't say written out of history, but it's for someone who was an important educator in the lives of so many important Canadian artists. It is a little odd that he's not more well known. Anyway, during the time when he's still in school, he starts working as an apprentice, sort of like a job shadow program, at a local graphic design company called Grip Limited. Now, Grip Limited it's quite fortunate that he takes on this job at Grip Limited, because that's where he meets most of the artists who become the Group of Seven. Because at Grip Limited, you have artists like J.H. MacDonald, who was I think the head of design there. J.H. MacDonald is the oldest member of the Group of Seven, so he's born in the early 1870s, and is sort of considered sort of the father of the group, I suppose you could say. But other artists who are working there are Arthur Lismer, Tom Thompson, Frank Johnston, and I think Varley starts working there also a little bit later. Two of the other artists who also form the Group of Seven are Lauren Harris, who comes from a super wealthy family, and A.Y. Jackson, who's originally from Montreal, who is not a wealthy guy, but he's probably the most successful artist of the bunch at that time, around 1912-13. So he's much more capable of supporting himself. Anyway, after a couple of, and so actually I just should say, while they're working at Grip Limited, one of the things that they famously do is they start going on these little group camping trips to some of the little lakes that are just outside of Toronto and are now part of Toronto, as Toronto has become this metropolis. But then they start going even further afield up to Algonquin Park. And those are formative experiences for everybody, right? I think they just were going out just as guys and, bringing their paints around. And, they had all gone to most of them, except Tom Thompson, really, had gone to formal art school, and yet they're working as graphic designers. So they're probably just like, we got to get out there and practice our art and the things that we've been trained to do. So they're going out, and I'm sure they're also having a bunch of beers and some good old laughs and stuff, and roasting marshmallows and ghost stories and all that, as well as making some paintings. But that is one of the ways that bonds all of those fellas together, right? Because it is also all guys, right? The Group of Seven is all men. Emily Carr does exhibit with the Group of Seven a number of times, but she never becomes a formal member of the group, even though A.Y. Jackson and Lauren Harris, who become quite close to her, basically suggest that had the Group of Seven continued, because the Group of Seven sort of disbands, I think in 1926 or 28, that she would have become a member of the group. Anyway, ironically, Carmichael goes to Belgium, to Antwerp, to study art at the Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts, and he's only there for about a year in 1913, and World War II breaks out in 1914. So that causes him to leave the country, and he returns back to Canada, ironically at the same time that many of his friends have enlisted in the Canadian Army and are going back across the ocean in the opposite direction to Europe. I'm not sure why he didn't go to war. That's one of the things, I think that's kind of a sticky subject for a lot of people at that time. Some artists like A.Y. Jackson immediately after seeing the war and seeing troops being kind of marching down the streets of I think it was in Montreal, or was it Quebec City, where he sees this, he goes and signs up. He's like, that's because A.Y. had spent his own summers in and around northern France, and then he sees the Germans invading that area, and he's like, I got to do something. Meanwhile, Carmichael and Tom Thompson stay back, and one of the things that the two of them do is they share a studio at the new studio building built by Lauren Harris. And so Lauren Harris, you know, as I said, is a wealthy young artist whose parents owned really the largest farm machinery company in North America. And so Lauren Harris decides to build this building called the Studio Building to house Canadian artists, in an effort to prevent them from going to Europe or the United States, because there was this kind of brain drain happening. So originally A.Y. Jackson and Tom Thompson share studio number 1 in the Studio Building, but Tom really struggles for money, so he moves into the shack out back, and Carmichael also, for a time, I think during 1914, moves into that shack with Tom Thompson. So, which would have been fine during the summer, but it's really just a wood shop. It was built so that the people, the woodworkers who built the studio building, and the Tom's shack was right in behind here. That's just where they could cut wood and assemble it together and lock up their tools at night. Tom moves in there, as well as Carmichael, because the rent would have been super cheap. I think it was like maybe $1 a month or something, as opposed to a little bit more to live in the building itself. Another thing too is that Thompson enjoyed the time that they spent together in Algonquin Park, and he invites Carmichael to go with him again in 1915, although Carmichael gets married on September 15th, which is my birthday. So that is really the last time, as far as I know, that Carmichael sees Tom Thompson, which is must have been it was very sad for all of the artists when Tom died under mysterious circumstances in Algonquin Park. And I'm sure there was probably a little bit of like, oh, I was supposed to go, I wonder what would have happened if we had gone on that trip. Anyway, another thing, a couple things I just want to mention too before I move on here, is that Carmichael also spends a lot of his time a little bit further. He's really the group of 7 member who spends the most time in the Great Lakes area and painting on Lake Superior and Lake Huron. Because while a lot of the other artists go up to Algonquin and to northern Ontario, or out west to Alberta and the Rocky Mountains, Carmichael kind of goes a little bit further south. The Great Lakes are kind of north and south and west and east of Toronto and environs. But the other thing that Carmichael is also very well known for is for he basically abandons oil painting in favor of watercolors in 1925, and from basically 1925 on, he's a watercolor painter exclusively. So much so that he founds the Canadian Society of Painters in Watercolor. And another of the founding members is A.J. Casson. I always say Canson. A.J. Casson is also a founding member of that group. So I think that kind of starts the little bit of the split in that group. Not that I don't think they were like, oh, you're not painting an oil paint anymore, but they're just sort of, it's like a band of musicians, and somebody decides they want to investigate a different kind of music, and they kind of start doing their solo album, and these guys start doing their solo album, and then it's just like, you know what, everyone started going their own direction. Let's just call it a day, guys. So the another thing that is worth just mentioning is, like Lauren Harris, fellow member of the group of 7, Franklin Carmichael becomes very interested in theosophy, and theosophy is sort of like a Christian an offshoot of Christianity that blends elements of Buddhism, and it's kind of like it also shares a lot of similarities to some of the writings of Raldo. Why do I have Emerson? Ralph Waldo Emerson. Raldo. Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau. I was going to do a Henri. I'm getting my words all mixed up here. So so a big part of that philosophy is the idea that paint and the goal of painting and of like all art, but in this instance for painting, can not only communicate but embody spiritual concepts, that it can be like a like a totem of some kind, like it can inspire, it can contain this transcendent quality, and that's what someone should aspire to do with their art, is to kind of tap into the unseen realm of the great unknown through your art. And the way that Harris takes theosophy is he starts making abstract paintings in the early 1930s, when he sort of leaves Toronto under a veil of the shroud of scandal, when he leaves his wife and children to go off with another woman, and he moves to Vancouver. He gets really into theosophy and starts making abstract paintings, and abandons the whole landscape motif that the Group of Seven were known for. Oddly enough, Carmichael, the last painting he was working on, was also an abstract painting, so it's possible that he was on the verge of a completely different shift in his art. But, you know, if we're just sort of quickly looking at some of these paintings, I think one of the things that I think is just really fantastic about Carmichael's work is the kind of the structure of these vast landscapes that tend to kind of just seem to recede endlessly into space. Let's see if we've got any other images here. There's just a lot of depth in his work that there is in other Group of Seven members' work, but I just feel like it's deeper in Carmichael's work. He often has really big things next to in the foreground, and then tiny things in the background. And I think potentially the fact that he's painting in watercolor, probably on location, just like the other artists were painting in oil, would have allowed him to get finer details than you can really get with oil paint when you're painting on location, because you're trying to paint really quickly, but the paint takes, can take weeks to dry. Watercolor, as you know, you can paint it, and 5 minutes later it's bone dry, even faster than acrylic paint. So that would allow you to kind of put some color down, it can dry, and then you can paint little details, like little houses on that wet surface. Whereas an oil painter, it's not that you couldn't do that, but it would be a little bit, you'd have to be maybe a little bit more thoughtful as to how you would do that, so that those colors aren't mixing together. Let's see. Is there anything else I want to mention? Oh, I guess just lastly, a couple quick things is that Franklin Carmichael, really up until he retired as a designer, continued designing and illustrating books, magazine covers. He illustrated like Maclean's magazine, which is very popular and important kind of like the Time magazine, perhaps, of Canada. And so he's a very prolific designer, whereas a lot of the other members of the Group of Seven who were previously designers at kind of by the 1920s had kind of quit their jobs and devoted themselves full-time to making art. Carmichael continued to maintain a private, commissioned-based graphic design illustration business, and yeah, I just think that that's interesting because you can see a lot of his etchings and prints out there. In fact, again, most of the work that he's known for are the watercolors, but then his book illustrations. And it's in 1933 he quits that job, becomes the head of the graphic design and commercial art department at the Ontario College of Art, where he stays until 1945. So it's interesting that he becomes not the head of the painting department or the drawing department, but the graphic design and commercial art department. And again, that sort of shows a little bit of a split between him and the group of seven, who really wanted to be known as artists first and foremost. Because back then, and even to this day, there is a tension between art and design. And even though often that line is kind of blurry and overlaps, that it's always existed, and there's sort of prejudices on both sides. And so anyway, I just think it's interesting, and that he maintained that practice for a while he was in that group, until eventually he left the group entirely, or the group folded. Here's just a couple, I think, just interesting examples of paintings that Tom Thompson made. And then here's one by Carmichael that I don't think these... Originally, I was just assumed that these were made side by side, but they weren't there together in 1915, so it just looks like similar kind of snowy motif. Yeah, and this is Muskoka Road, so yeah, nowhere near Algonquin Park. But one of the things, just to kind of, I guess, get close to wrap up here, is that Tom was mostly self-educated when it comes to painting. He did take graphic design classes, and he took some, we think, evening classes with William Cruikshank. But unlike all the other members who had formal training, some even went to Europe, well, just like Franklin Carmichael did in Belgium. It is kind of, I think, what astounded all of Tom Thompson's peers is that this guy who had no real formal training really quickly exceeded the rest of them in his ability to paint and describe the landscape outside, in the landscape itself. And partly, I assume, I think because Tom didn't have the kind of, maybe the baggage of all that education, he didn't really know the quote-unquote rules. He just painted, and all the other guys are like, well, I guess I was told not to do that, but you're doing it, and it looks good. I mean, gosh, now I don't really know, so that can kind of mess with people's heads a little bit. So it's interesting that the student kind of becomes the teacher, and that is one of the reasons after Tom dies that the group of seven have such fond memories of him, that they include Tom's art whenever the group of seven exhibits, and often leave an empty chair in the middle of the gallery for Tom's spirit to inhabit the space, because he had passed away in 1917. Okay, so I think that's probably enough. Let's move on here. So the underpainting, I don't think we'll do an underpainting in this painting. Usually, there's different definitions of an underpainting. Some would describe it basically as what I would say is my pass 1 and 2 of my foreground and background layers. But some people, probably like Carmichael, would probably either draw... Well, he would be painting, probably drew this with pencil first, actually. So now that I think about it, this probably wouldn't look too different than what I've got here, although he would be painting probably on white paper. So with that in mind, part of me thinks, should I coat this with a kind of thin... No, you know what? I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to use... let's go right to background pass number 1. Okay, so let's start by mixing some colors in our background, and then we'll move to the foreground, and then we're going to come back to the background, finish that off, and then finish the foreground, and we'll be all done. Easier said than done, of course, though, right? So let's take a look at this. So when I say background, what I essentially mean is probably really the top half of this painting is what we're going to use. And we're going to use almost exclusively cool colors. So that when we're thinking about when you're trying to mix a color and identify a color, if someone is painting something recognizable like a landscape or a face or a dog or a building, cityscape, etc., just think about like, where's that color? Is it in the foreground or is it in the background? If it's in the background, then we want to use cool colors to mix it. And we have 3 cool colors: a cool blue, cool red, and a cool yellow. So then that already narrows the palette down to 3 possible colors, and then that makes it easier for you to sort of guess, you know, the resulting mixture from it. Now in this painting we do have some warmer colors, but we'll do that in a subsequent layer, because I want to get some cool colors down first, because those cool colors have the illusion of receding and warm colors will advance. So even if I do use some cool colors in that or if I use some warm colors in that background, I want them to be sort of pinned to some cool colors, so that they'll, even though they want to move forward, they're kind of being reined back in a little bit. So to begin with, I think what I want to do is I want to mix a bit of like a white that's going to go in to this background here, like a cool blue with a lot of white. So I'm going to take this white and let's take a little bit of cool blue. That's actually maybe too much. We'll see. I'm also just going to take a little dollop here of matte medium. Matte medium is just clear paint. There's no pigment in it. So I'm going to put a bit of this in here. And I'm just going to add a bit more white. So this is going to make this color just a little bit more transparent, so that I can keep some of that yellow coming through this paint. Just want to get it nice and stirred up so that I have an even layer of paint here. And so let's begin. If you don't have matte medium, that's okay. You don't need it to do this. It's just, it gives kind of a cool effect. It's basically kind of like a glaze process. So we'll see if I might want to do another layer of that eventually, but I'm also going to take this and I'm just going to paint this down here as well. So the reason why I put a little bit of matte medium in here is that the matte medium is going to make that color a little bit more transparent. And because otherwise, you know, there's a lot of white in this color. And if I just paint that white onto this painting, it's going to obliterate all my yellow very quickly, because white is such an opaque color. So I don't want this yellow to go completely away because I love the subtle effect that it creates. So just this little bit of a golden hue that I think is really cool. And the other thing too is it's okay if I go a little bit over some of these edges, those black lines. So we'll let that dry because it's a little bit spotty. So I'm going to let it dry and then I'll add more here in a bit. So let's move on to some other areas of this painting. Because I might be happy with this, or I might decide it needs to get darker. We'll see. We'll just wait for it to dry. Most of the time when we're painting the color with acrylics, the color can, well, it's always different. Sometimes they get more opaque or more transparent when they dry. Sometimes they get darker or lighter when they dry. And so and oil paint to a lesser extent does that. So the advantage of acrylic paint is you can just let it dry, and like 20 minutes later you know exactly what it looks like. Okay, so let's what should we do next? There's so many. Let me just show you these colors. I mean, one of the reasons I chose this painting is it's just the color, at least the more saturated version as opposed to this one, which is the National Galleries. I think it's still brighter than this. This might just be the raw image right off the camera. But there's just so many beautiful colors in here. I think I'm going to start with a cool blue. And we could paint a lot of this. In fact, it's just I'm just thinking to myself, you know, this is done in watercolor, so we could do a lot of very transparent layers of paint like a watercolor does. Do I want to do that? We could. I could just keep adding. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So I'm gonna take my cool blue here, and I'm just gonna mix it into this color, into the white and cool blue that also has matte medium in it to make it a little bit more transparent. You could just forego this and just go white and cool blue, and no problem. Your results will be 70% what I'm gonna get here. So I know this is purple here, but that's okay because I can paint purple right over that area. let's do the water, although I'm just going to get a little bit more white into this color that's going to go in the water, just to give it a slightly more muted quality. I keep thinking to myself, like, a fun activity would be at some point just to go back and try to redo a bunch of the paintings I've done without looking at how I did them in the past, and see how closely I would end up, the finished paintings would be to the originals, or to the first version I did. Because each time I'm sort of coming up with a little bit of a different strategy, and I'm just you know, it's like it's like a bit of a detective story here, trying to kind of work my way in reverse to get to the finished painting. Yeah, I'm just going to use the same blue. Okay. So, what should we do next? Let's put this up here. Let's add a little bit of let's mix a brown now. So I'm going to take my cool yellow and my cool red, and let's mix that together. You notice I didn't clean my brush because I'm about to use a little bit of blue as well. Actually, I don't even think I need to use the blue. There's enough blue on my palette to get me this brown, or there's enough blue left on my brush. If I had just mixed this cool yellow with my cool red, I would have got a little bit more of an orangey color, but that blue that's in there took that orange and pulled it towards the center, and therefore making it brown. Now, likewise, I'm just going to put a little bit of matte medium in there. Stir that up. And then let's paint and don't worry if you're smudging some of the paint that's in there, some of the blues or the white in the sky. It's a-okay. And if you don't get this exactly like the original, that's a-okay too. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for the big shapes here, right? You can see that I'm painting some blue where it's purple. I'm painting some of this brown where it's going to be kind of green or orangey. So I'm just looking at like putting in a color that can just be a base layer, and then I can paint subsequent colors over top of this, and where those are will be kind of modified by these the colors that I'm putting in here right now. Kind of like that. So I put a little bit of the same blue here. I just went over top of it with that brown, and it just kind of changed a little bit. Okay, that's good. Now let's take, what should we do, a green? Like up here, let's take a little bit of this yellow. And then how about let's make a, it's going to get some of that off. Let's take just some more red. Let's put this red in here to make a purple. Let's put a bit of matte medium in there just to thin it out a bit. Okay. I think that's pretty good. We'll get the trees in on the next bit here, I think. So there's Deb, or Debbie, is it Deb or Debbie? Says, I'm 70 and just started painting last year. I was struggling a bit, but once I learned to paint shapes instead of things, I was much happier with the results. Absolutely. Yeah, instead of trying to think of these as mountains, just think of them as colored shapes, and then paint those shapes in. And if you just focus on that, then eventually those mountains will kind of appear in your image. Okay, so let's move on from our background to the foreground. So we've got kind of the beginnings of our background, our first pass done. Let's do the first pass on the foreground itself. So this time we're going to use warm colors. We're going to mix warm colors that are going to go in the front and the bottom half of this painting. So the first warm colors we see are some of these warm blues, and we're going to put some of those warm blues up here eventually in the top part of the painting. But let's start at the bottom. So let's take this warm blue now. Let's add some white to it, just a little bit. And I'm going to add some matte medium. Right, oops, let's come back here, I guess. Stir that up real good. The other thing too is because we're painting on this yellow background, you might find that these colors are going to get kind of dark very quickly if I don't add a little bit of white in here. You'd see very different blue to the blue that I put at the top of the painting, right? That was a cool blue, and here I'm using a warm blue. So I'm going to paint this area right here with a cool blue over top of this eventually. So that area, I want to make sure it's got a little bit of warm blue underneath it to pull that color back and keep it from going into the background. I'll just show you how I'm doing this. So I'm just holding the brush kind of like that. Which allows me to get these sharper lines. Okay, let's take a little bit of warm yellow now. It's going to give us a kind of warm green. Not too dissimilar. Looks very different on the palette. You start painting with it though, and it kind of changes, right? Not quite so obvious anymore. let's get these happy little trees, as Bob Ross liked to say, right? Okay, and then let's take some warm red, a little bit of white. Just mixed a little bit of my blue in there. Oh, I missed a little bit of green back here. I just stole a little bit of red on there. Again, I want to fill this up. This would be a little bit different than if we were painting actually with watercolors, but I just want to get a bunch of these shapes in as quickly as possible. And how about, you know what, I'm just going to use this same color where all this white goes. Put that there. I'm going to put it here too. Even though they're not really in the right place. It'll all work out in the end. Okay. This looks a little crooked here, doesn't it? A little that water back there. That'll just be something as I get closer. I'm gonna probably just want to bring this up a little bit on that side and just straighten that out. Don't know how I missed that, but that's okay. Heidi says, "Hi Deb, that's great. I almost never. It's almost never too late to paint. It's never too late to paint. Absolutely. You know, Grandma Moses didn't really start painting until she was in her 70s or 80s. I can't remember. But she did take art classes when she was in her teens, but took a big break from raising her kids and some grandkids, and then started making art again late in life, to great acclaim." Okay, just have to take a little tea break here. I love my tea. So here's my painting at this stage. There's still plenty to do here, and I think it's important to see that a painting can look like this before it looks like the one on the left, because we sort of look at the left and think, okay, I've got to get all those colors exactly right the very first time, and there's definitely some people that do paint that way, but this is definitely not the way that Carmichael would have painted, because we do see lots of different layers and colors underneath here. So that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to build those initial colors that will go underneath the finished colors, the final colors. So let's go back to the background And let's, well, I don't know if we'll finish the background, but we'll do a little bit more on the background. Let's just see how far we get here. So let's bring up the painting again. And another thing about doing this in passes is we can now look at the sky, and I can decide, is my sky done enough? Like, can I move on, or do I need it to look more like what we see in the original? And I look at the original, I don't know. I'm gonna do more of the water. I'm gonna put some more white in here, but as for the sky, I think right now I'm happy with it. Again, I might change my mind. Ideally, I would make that decision right now. And because I got to make that decision, I mean, you don't have to, but it would be easier, because that way everything I do paints over top of the sky. I'm going to leave it. I think it's okay. The only thing is there's that area where I peeled that paint off. Some little frayed area there. I just want to cover that. And now that area is going to be a little bit more opaque. So I might just touch this up a little bit. Areas where it was a little bit thinner. So this is just the extra little bit of paint that I used for that sky. You know, basically at this, yeah, let's just paint it right over. I'm just kind of like basically painting everything. It's like, well, let's just do it. But it's not a very thick layer at all, because I don't want to lose that little bit of yellow that's coming through there from my Imprimatura. Yeah, I mean, like, you might even already see the difference between this, which has now got 2 layers, the second layer being very thin, and then this one down here, right, looks much more transparent, right? That's the difference between 1 layer and 2 layer. Oh, hi, Holly. Holly just made a donation, 25 bucks in the super chat. Thank you, Holly. I appreciate that. Very cool. Thanks for your support. Everyone, there's a lot of people who are constantly supporting the show, and it helps pay the bills to keep all of this running and the internet connection, etc. So let's go back to the background, and let's take a bit more of this blue. I'm just gonna mix. I guess I could try to get away with some of this up here. I'm also gonna add, again, just a little bit of matte medium since I've started with it. That matte medium is going to ensure that each layer is a little bit transparent, so rather than covering up the layer that was below it, it's still kind of shining through in some way. And that just adds that extra little bit of complexity. We need a bit more blue in there. back to some just a little bit lighter. I'm also going to take this and I'm going to go with this cool color into the foreground. So at this point we're going to start bouncing a little bit more back and forth, foreground to background, etc. Where else? Okay. Now let's take some of the cool red. Mix this in here. It's going to give us a cool purple. Right, so now things are kind of starting to modify a little bit. Now we can really kind of get some really wild results where colors are just by layering these semi-transparent layers over top of one another. Get some really beautiful results. Take a bit of that white, mix that in here. Let's get a bit more of that. Okay. Now let's take let's mix some more green here. Let's take some cool blue, cool red, or sorry, cool blue and cool yellow. Let's get a bit more white on here. And once again, our matte medium. We're going to come in here and paint all of this. It's obviously going to get darker, but all that green in there. As well. Okay. I think that's, I'm going to do another pass on that, but I'm going to move to the foreground again. Okay, so now we've done a second pass on the background. Let's do the foreground again. I'm going to have to do a third pass on the background, but building it up this way, for me, just feels really relaxed. I can just take mix the same color, put it in a few different places as I go, and it's going to be that next layer in the background where I tinker with that and get a little bit more specific. Now I just want to build a little bit more up in the middle ground, including the water that's down here. Holly says, sorry gang, we just had a catastrophe. Do good. Oh, I hope everything's going all right there, Holly. Okay. So now let's, in the foreground, let's add, let's mix a purple. Let's take our warm blue with our cool red. And it's going to give us a bit more of a saturated purple. That's really dark. I'm going to add just a little bit of white to it. And I'm going to add a little bit of matte medium again, of course. So you can see the difference between this purple here, my more intense saturated purple, compared to our cool and less saturated purple there. Right? The only difference being the different blues that I used. I was going to paint the water, wasn't I? Well, we'll get to that shortly. And maybe I'll even put a bit of purple into these trees. Ah, I forgot I need to do that water. Okay, let's do that next. So the reason why I should have done that water first is because if I'm gonna, I would ideally like to be able to brush over top of these colors without that color mixing into the color I'm working with. So let's take some matte medium. That's a lot. Let's scoop a bit out of the way. Let's take white. We don't need so much. And we probably don't need so much blue, but let's... Ah, that's too much. Darn it. Yeah, way too dark. So we're gonna just mix it again. I'm just gonna take a bit of that, mix it into this white. I'm just going to take a bit of cool blue, just some extra little mixture that's around here. So that's going to make this not quite as cold as the sky was. It's going to be a little bit more in between. And then let's put some matte medium there as well. And I'm going to use... Well, let's see if we can get away with a smaller brush. It's definitely got a lot darker, hey? That's okay. I can bring it back up, add a little bit more white and a little bit more cool blue, but I need to let that dry, otherwise it's going to get just really kind of streaky. So, in fact, maybe I'll blow dry that now and then actually tackle that at this stage, because I really want to be able to move on to finishing around that area, and ideally I would paint over top of that. So let's mute the audio for sorry, my microphone was muted that whole time. I was just saying that he might have what was I just saying? Oh, he wouldn't have been doing all this stuff that I'm doing here, because this is just water that would have been probably just the plain white of the paper. Let's add a bit of cool blue into this mixture that we can paint in down here at the bottom. I'll let that dry. If I want, I can add even just a little bit more down there. In fact, let's just do that real quick. I looked at time. Oh, not bad for where we're at. Okay, so have we done the gone to the foreground? It's 2 yet. I don't know if I've put the slide up, but now let's I'm just gonna do that in case I think I have. Did I do the foreground slide number 2? I think I did that already. Okay, so let's do some more brown. Let's mix a warm brown or warm green. Do we need a warm? Let's mix a warm green first. And since I'm in my foreground now, I'm going to be using less and less matte medium, because that matte medium, I want my colors to be a little bit more saturated in the foreground. Oh, that's a reflection. Interesting. Okay, gotta modify that a bit. Okay, let's take some warm red now, bring that in here to get a brown. Yeah, we'll just do it like that. Now that just is like, whoa, that is much darker, way more intense than anything else on the painting thus far. Now you can start to see things starting to appear. I'm going to take my, let's take the warm blue. Just going to mix it into some of this paint down here. Let's take a bit of, actually, you know what? Let's take some warm red. I'm going to take some cool yellow. Because what I'm mixing is the dark for these trees here. add some cool blue. It's basically kind of making a black and adding a bit of warm blue into it. All right, so to make a black, we mix our warm red, cool blue, and cool yellow. So basically I've mixed that and just added blue to it, which gives it this little bit of a slightly teal dark green. And so we'll see how that works on this painting. So this is quite odd to put this big tree that goes right up. And you know, I really, now that I see that, I probably would have wanted to finish that background before I do this, but that's okay. There's never a perfect path. Let's do and same thing, this tree on the other side kind of being partially touching. The foreground is pretty wild. Ah, there's Deborah says hello. Has trouble on Thursday nights because they teach music and run out of time. But Rick and I are excited to do this. We'll watch tomorrow. Awesome. Now, I'm making progress in the foreground. Ideally, though, I would finish the background before I do too much more work in the foreground, because I want to make sure that I have access to my most saturated colors. And if I put saturated colors here and I go even more saturated there, then I got to go back and add more saturated colors in the foreground. So I think I am going to stop working in the foreground and finish my background next. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff in place now. Now it's fine-tuning the background is what we're going to do. And we're going to move on from the background and finish that over the next half hour or so. Then we're going to finish the foreground in the remaining half hour or so. Just get that brush cleaned so it doesn't get all gummy. This is where we're at the moment. I think it's time now to do some darker greens and then some browns. So let's do the darker. Suppose we could use this, but it's. We need to lighten it up, perhaps just a little bit. A little bit of white. Probably didn't need to put that white in there. That's probably could have just used the. So let's get a bit more of that, darken it down. Still not dark enough. Okay, we'll get it darker, but let's let that dry. Let's see, any other green? Can that go up here? Maybe while that's drying, let's get some brown going. So we'll take this cool yellow and cool red. Let's mix that together, and you can see now we've got an orange, a little bit of blue coming in there. It's going to make it go brown. And you know, as I'm going, I'm kind of also adding my own little flair to things. I'm not super worried about getting it exactly like the original. Not worried at all. So you can see I'm just sort of like layering like this brown over top of blues and purples, and it's darkening things, giving kind of some outlining qualities, and I just keep layering and layering different colors over top of one another, as one does with watercolor. And because I've originally painted this with you know, these semi-transparent layers, everything kind of just mixes and blends and adds nuance. And let's take, let's just wash these brushes real quick. Rick says, it will be challenging, and for me, will force me to be more disciplined. I think you're pretty disciplined, Rick. Gabriel South Park Guy says, hi, Michael, how are you doing? I just want to say thank you for inspiring me to learn how to draw. I started learning just recently, so I still suck at drawing. Anyways, thanks again. Cheers from Brazil. Yay, Brazil! You guys had a big soccer game. Well, early this morning. I was going to say yesterday or today, but congratulations to those following the World Cup. Canada had a disappointing loss, even though they were doing really good the other day, but so it is. let's take some cool red. Just a little bit of white. A little bit of medium. And let's get this mountain back here. You know, so this is definitely looking pretty wild. It's just getting kind of almost a little bit psychedelic, at least the way that I'm painting it. But this is the kind of thing that I love doing. I love these semi-transparent layers, which are all kind of, all these odd colors mixing, kaleidoscopic kind of quality. So it's also, we're losing a bit of definition. We'll come back with a little bit of outlining a little bit later on. It looks like he did add, you know, again, this is watercolor, but he did add white back in there as well. So, part of me does want to add maybe a bit of white back in here in that water. Should I add? Is it too late to add water? It's never too late. Yeah. Let's take some white. Let's take some glazing fluid. So that's super subtle. But I like that. It doesn't now that I look at it with a bit more white, this starts to look a little bit green even in there. But I think I'm okay with that. In fact, actually, now that I got that white, let's take it and I'm just going to put some of this in this area in the foreground. Very little of this in the background. Should just use a smaller brush. I'm not sure why I'm trying to do this with larger brushes for some strange reason. Interesting. Heidi says, in some ways, this looks like some of the Cubist paintings we've done. Definitely. Definitely. There's, and that was one of the things that there were, the group of seven had conflicted feelings about what was going on in Europe. You know, they like to say that there was a lot of drama. The critics were tearing them apart, and they're fighting the good fight to open Canadians' eyes to modern art, when in reality, in many ways, the group of seven was kind of was behind the times. because this painting is made in 1928, 29. By that time, Cubism is come and gone, right? And so compared to what's going on in New York and Paris and Berlin, this is sort of more like what artists were doing in those places in like the early 1900s, you know, kind of a lot like what Matisse was doing in the 1904, along with the Fauves and Les Nabis and those artists. Having said that, and I say this with love as a Canadian, Canada is always a little bit behind the times. You know, like when I lived in Los Angeles and I would come back to Canada and everything, it was like going 5 months back in time. Everything was just a little bit slower, and the fashions hadn't quite, you know, the wave hadn't quite crested onto the shore yet. Which, you know, I think of like a director like David Cronenberg, a very famous Canadian film director, really used Canadianness as like a kind of fantastical quality, like creating this slightly parallel universe, which Canada is to the United States in some ways, and to give it that weird oddity, strangeness, which is a big part of his movies, which always kind of border on horror and mystery and strangeness. Anyway, let's get some more purple back in here. Don't want too much white. So I'm just going to mix that and put matte medium into it so that it's saturated, but it's transparent. So it's not going to be quite as dark as a color in the foreground. Again, this just allows me to do so many cool things. Building up these layers. Okay, now I'm gonna do a little finer tuning. Okay. Let's get some green. Let's do a cool green. Where can I put that? Take this dark green and just bring this back in here darken a bit more. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of warm blue and bring that into the painting. Maybe I should put just a little bit of matte medium in here. That's pretty strong, pretty dark. So I'm just going to modify it with a little bit of matte medium to make it just a little bit transparent. Maybe. Just going over some of this stuff in the background and just taking some of the intensity of these colors out with just a little bit of this. Oops, see, I'm just wiping that paint away. I don't want too many really intense colors in that distant background, otherwise they're going to compete with the foreground. Okay. Now let's take just a bit of white. I don't like what's going on there. That's pretty sloppy. So let's just take a little bit of water. I'm just going to wipe that away. I want white, but it should have a little bit of brown in there. Otherwise, it's just too much. Okay. So I'm just sort of painting those lines, and then I'm kind of just wiping them away with my finger. And so there's a little bit of matte medium in here so that I can keep going and keep brightening if I want to some of those areas. That's actually, this is a bit of warm yellow that I'm putting into here. A little bit of color I can take and bring back. Okay. I gotta, whoa, time has just slipped away from me real quick there. Okay. So let's, I'm gonna have to move to the, even though there's still lots more I could do there, I'm gonna have to move to my foreground. Incognito Shadow says 8:38 a.m. from where I'm watching. Where are you watching from? Incognito Shadow? 8:38. Well, where would that be? That Africa? Europe? Where is that? Creating says, hi Michael, it's been a while since I've seen your live show. It's really late here, so recently I only see your show in replay. I'm curious what you make for art for yourself normally. Well, I'm working on a graphic novel, and you'll start seeing some of that soon as we get closer to publishing it. Yeah, there's also my website. The link is down below if you want to check that out. I've done some pretty wild stuff over the years. If you want to see some of that, some of the paintings and performances and sculptures, videos, movies, all that kind of stuff. Nilanjan, is that Nilanjan? Nilanjan says, hi sir, hello. So now I'm feeling pretty good about this. There might be a little bit of tinkering, finishing touches going on, but I don't have time to do too much more in there. So I'm going to have to finish my bottom down here. Let's go to... Okay, I got the background really well established. There's a little, it's not quite exactly what I want, but there might be a few finishing touches. So let's now just go down to the bottom foreground and get that at least up to speed with the background, and we'll see where we're at. I kind of want to wrap up in half an hour or so, so we'll see how much we can do in that short amount of time. Time, as you know, if you're painting, all of a sudden you look up, you're like, whoa, where did that last hour just go? Okay. So let's now just dive right into, we got our warm blue. I want to take this and right out of the tube paint it. Well, actually there is a little bit of glazing or matte medium here, fluid in here. It's okay. A little bit more transparent means I'll probably have to do this a second time once this dries, but there's some warm blue right out of the tube. Let's just... Let's get some purple, mix a purple up here with our cool red. Oh, that's a bigger blob than I was hoping. It's going to take a bit more medium and a bit of the cool red. Let's get a bit more of our blue. Okay, now let's get some of this cool blue back in here. Where should we do this? Let's put this cool blue here. I'm going to add just a little bit of warm blue into it, so it's a little bit more of a cobalt blue and not just a pure warm or cool blue, just so that those colors just because we want to keep those warmer colors in the foreground, cooler colors in the background. So even though this is a bit cool, we want to just try to keep it in the warmer zone if possible. I'm going to paint that down in here too. So there's also some weird stuff going on down in the bottom right. And that's a lot of details, little washes and things he's done here. Okay, let's mix brown. Let's take our warm blue, cool or warm red. That's going to give us a pretty dark purple. I'm just going to add a bit of warm yellow into it. That's going to give us a brown. as I said, like, there's definitely places in here where the, you know, what I'm doing isn't actually there. And I'm just sort of playing a little bit fast and loose with the painting. But, you know, when you're working on your painting and it just starts, you kind of feel compelled to do something, just do it. Don't worry about it. I think you should feel encouraged to play and experiment, take some risks, see what happens when you do this or that, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't work out. If it doesn't work out, it's just a painting. You can always paint it out. You can always fix it, or who knows, maybe it does work out. And then you've created something super cool and different and new and brought something new into the world. Yeah, people are going to be like, well, there's lots of made certain changes, but I'm just kind of having fun geeking out down here on the bottom of the painting. Let's get this dark, warm green a bit. So I'm kind of just doing outlines with darker colors right now. Okay. Human says, good morning from Iraq. Hello, my friend. I've been watching you live your live free course, and it was so helpful. Thank you so much. It was a game-changing for me, people who live in an isolated places like me, so thank you again. You are welcome. Great to see you. Yeah, join the Facebook group. Thanks, Paula Ace, for suggesting that to Human. Awesome. Okay. So we're getting closer here. Let's... Really what we're going to do... Well, I mean, how much more do I want to do, really? I mean, I could do a lot of fine-tuning up here. That could take me a while. So you know what? Let's... How am I doing for time? Yeah, we should probably... Okay, so we're going to do some finishing touches to try to wrap this painting up. And even though it's not, you know, but we could work on this for a few more hours. I want to try to get all done here in about 15 minutes or so. So, really, the areas that I want to do are some of the reflections, or these white lines. I think they need to be just a little bit sharper. I need my trees that are, you know, these dark trees, I need to make them darker, so I'm going to mix a black, and probably we'll use a little bit, it'll be a few different kinds of black that we're going to use. And I might do a little bit of details in the bottom right corner. So let's just see them side by side so you can just see where we're at this stage. The Facebook group is in the video description below there. Thank you for mentioning that, Paula. Okay, so to mix this, our black, because we haven't really, I didn't show it completely here. Where should we mix this? Well, I'm looking for a place that's pretty dry. Okay, so let's take our cool blue. We'll take our cool yellow, mix that together, and we get a really nice green. Really nice lime green. It's bright and colorful. Now we're going to mix the color opposite to this color on the color wheel, which is our warm red. So we put this in here, and when we mix it all in together, that color slowly cancels the other colors out until we get a black. Sometimes it takes a little while, and people are like, it looks green, or it looks brown, it looks purple. Just have to keep on going until all those colors are well mixed. That looks pretty good. If you don't know whether you got a black or not, just take that color, add a little bit of white to it, and then you can see. So that's pretty close. It is a little bit more on the purple side. So what that tells me is I've got red and blue in enough quantities. I need to add some white. And now I want this to be black, so I'm just going to take the white off my brush and make sure it's nice and clean. Let's add a bit more yellow in here. There we go. Okay, and just for our sake, let's just take a bit more white. Not sure how well that comes up on camera. It is more neutral gray, so that tells me I'm pretty close to a black. Because when the colors are really dark like that, it's really hard to tell exactly what you got. I think also it's just worth, noticing in this painting here, as well as in the original, but especially in mine, what's working well is these colors back here. They're bright. When you look at them on their own, they look nice and saturated. But compared to what we have down here, these colors are even more intense, more saturated. So in almost every instance, there's a little bit of white in all of these colors, or they're transparent, semi-transparent. So what that does is it just gives it a little bit of a slightly pastel, slightly ghosted quality, which makes it look further away. And the more and more I use more saturated colors without any white down here. Now there is some white, obviously, but if I surround that or complement it with colors that are fully saturated, no white, then it's already, there's this there's a distance that's created in the painting. So especially when I start putting these dark black trees in there, that is going to just launch this thing right forward. So we even have to be careful that because there are some of these trees back here which are also dark, but we're not going to use quite as much black. We want to reserve the black for the foreground there. So let's mix the color that we want. I'm going to put, where should I paint this? Let's do this right here. It's going to be a bit of both warm and cool blue to get a little bit more of that cobalt quality, which is the color that exists between those two blues. And I'm even going to put a little bit of yellow in here, just a slight greenish quality. And now I'm going to add my black to it. So what this does is now we've just got a really, really dark color. In fact, well, ideally what I would do is maybe even paint that color before that little bit of a blue, but it's okay. Let's go in and add these into... So I'm just going to paint this with a relatively small brush. So I'm probably actually going to go back over some of that with just black on its own. It's not quite as dark as I want it to be in places, not everywhere, but in some places. like that color there. This one, I'm going to add a bit more cool blue to the mixture. So I just took a little bit of cool blue here and mixing it into the same color. I'm just going to rotate that around. It'll be easier to paint it. This is closer to the color that I was planning to have in those foreground trees. This little bit more of a teal. That's okay. Yeah, you can see that. I think just while I'm here, I'm going to do a bit more of that. Take that color bit of that there. Okay. Let's do the opposite now. Let's, do I have any more warm blue? Let's take some warm blue and mix this into my dark color, because here we want to take so it's interesting that he decided to use that little bit of a cooler blue in the reflection and the warmer blue above water. And I'm sure he would have had a reason. I don't know. I can't. I'd have to think about, you know, the theory behind that, but. So I'm just going very, very lightly and brushing in a bit of that. In fact, let's do that the opposite down here. I like that look, so let's bring a bit of that in. Oh, shoot. Sorry, that wasn't on camera. camera completely there. I'm just going to take a bit of white and mix this into here to make a little bit of a gray. So it's going to be darker, or it's going to be lighter just a little bit. That way I can, you know, do the same sort of thing. In the background ever so slightly. And that might have been a bit too much, but we're running a little bit late, so it'll have to do. And so this just allows me just to clarify these shapes back there. Okay, I have to be careful. Oof, just almost started stamping paint all over the bottom of the picture because I was getting paint on my brush. Or paint on my hand, I mean. In fact, you know what? I should just blow dry this before I keep doing that. Humam says, I've noticed that you used brighter colors in your painting. Is that for a specific reason? That's a great, yeah, absolutely. You're bang on. I do use brighter colors quite often. It's just a personal preference. I just tend to like brighter paintings. You don't have to do that. It's just something, I just like bright colors, I guess. So, you know, I just sort of take these paintings as like suggestions, and I decide sometimes to really kind of just play with them a little bit. And I find that a lot of fun to kind of tinker with them and add my own little spin to them. And I suggest everybody does the same as well. that you should feel free and inspired to play with the colors. As I said, like the original version of this painting, that is the at least that's what the National Gallery of Canada has on file. And so I kind of like the bit more bright, colorful version of it that I originally found on the web. And yeah, you can choose whichever one you want to paint. It'll be interesting because I know there'll be a few people in the Facebook group who will paint the original or the so-called the real version, or whichever you want to think about it. One thing is like outlining. Some people love it, some people hate it. I remember when I was in art school, I had teachers who really did not like, because I love outlining. I used to do it all the time. And I had teachers who just like, you've got to make the colors do the outlining for you. You've got to put, let those colors sort of blend into one another. And it's a crutch. Someone used the analogy. It's like in film, doing a voiceover is sort of seen as sort of like a really lazy way of telling your story, because you just get the character to tell you what's happening, as opposed to the showing it. You want to show, not tell, in film. And so people have said the same thing, like about painting. You want the painting to show rather than rely on the lines to do all the heavy lifting for you. But I can understand that. Come on. There we go. I mean, I understand and appreciate that point of view. I don't necessarily really agree with it, but... And, I had lots of debates with teachers, and... And I think, now that as I'm a teacher now myself, it's what I try to do is challenge people and challenge their ideas and what they accept as just the way things are done, and see if they can experiment for just a short period of time with a different way of doing things. And if at the end of the day they decide to go back to what feels comfortable, then by all means. Let's look at this hill here. Oh yeah, there's some little trees over here. So much for 15 minutes, hey? It's going to take some warmer yellow and warm blue. Okay, so last little few things here. Let's take our black again. And now this is just my pure black. And I'm just going to, oops. Go back over. Because that will ensure that these those trees there, stay as close to the foreground as possible. this red down there, I think I want to just make that a bit more intense. Let's take our warm red and our black. So I'm just trying to bring a little bit more, besides that blue, just a little bit more of intense little red down in there. In fact, now that I just notice, there is some just pure red in here, and I'm sure that this, he's doing exactly what one, probably should do, which is to try again bring those intense colors right up to the front. Okay. Let's take a bit of white. Intensify those areas. In fact, actually, there's these little bits of just white, little dots and speckles and stuff. Okay. Oh, the white on the water, and then I think we're done. just going to turn it so that I can get at some of this just a little bit easier. And I don't necessarily want to draw like big white lines everywhere. They might kind of come in and out. So as I'm doing it, I'm kind of twisting my brush a little bit. Right, I'm taking my paintbrush and then I twist it a bit. Now, he didn't do any of that here, but I think I am going to do... just a little bit. So I think I gotta call it a day there. So let's start our wrap up here. Okay, I'm really excited about this painting. It took, well, actually not too much longer than I thought it would. If I didn't talk so long about the biographies and stuff, we would have been done on what I thought we would. Anyway, so actually just before we do wrap up, consider liking, subscribing, hit that notification bell so you know when the upcoming episodes are coming, are going to be on. please join the Facebook group. The Facebook group is where you can take a photograph of your art, upload it to the Facebook group, and once a month I go through here and celebrate people's artwork, including versions of the paintings we're doing in class and the ones you might be doing outside of class. And if you want to support the work that we're doing here, consider leaving a donation via PayPal. You can use the super chat function, contact me via email or through the Facebook group itself. So, let's see. Here's the original. And there's my version next to it. Well, now it's okay. When I see it like that, you know, there's things that I might, you know, want to do a little bit differently. And if I had more time, I would tinker with. Like I noticed over here, we could put a teal in there. I wonder if I should just quickly do that. Let's take our yellow, cool blue, and a bit of get it a bit dirtier with a bit of black. Let's take some of this. That's a bit better. You know, just gotta go. Okay. So, yeah. That's cool. I like, you know, these little dots that I put down in there. I think those are kind of things that I love doing because, again, people might think they're a mistake, but they bring your attention to those little details. They suck you into the painting. So I'm always attracted to that type of those details. They're not exactly what he did, but I'm happy with it. Again, I like how this is just a little bit foggy back there. It's slightly muted. I think it gives it that space and the distance, and the water is also just another degree more gray, so a little bit more muted. So we have intense colors in the foreground, less intense colors in the background, and much less intense colors in the water as well. Let's just zoom in and take a look. Let's start in the top left. Again, you can see, you know, just for the sake of time, I've kind of just simplified a lot of things. But it's a lot of fun, just like layer after layer after layer of color, and all those colors are all slightly different, and so there's lots of nuance in that area, or in this painting. Let's bring that down a bit, just so you can see. Yeah, oh, that kind of drives me a bit nuts too. Let's just clear that up. Otherwise, I think that's okay. I can live with everything else. Let's go to the far right. Yeah, again, there's more stuff that I want to do there, just out of time. I like, you know, how just those little subtle lines on there really help. let's go down to the bottom of the painting. Yeah, I mean, definitely this area, he's done some really fun stuff that is maybe more unique to watercolor. But I don't mind. I think it's okay. And then let's bring it back to that area in the center. That's cool. It's still very wet here. When that dries, we'll see less of that texture and it'll be much darker. And then our far right, I've also kind of just, you know, riffed off this and done a few things here. I think that turned out pretty good. I'm happy with my choice of using a little bit of white there. I think that also helps. Okay, let's bring it back out one last time. Okay, there we go. Notice a bunch of comments there. Blue Dog says, I will be painting this on the weekend. And John says, all right, yes, Michael. Love the way you put all the color intensity into the canvas. Save it to store after the touch-up, varnish, etc. I'm looking for it later on. Humam says, you're right, John. If it's up to me, I will never be able to use saturated colors like Michael. Interesting. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. There might be a bonus episode on Sunday evening. We'll see. I have to look at the schedule. But otherwise, we will see you all on at least next Thursday for sure. So, good night. We'll see you then. Take care, everybody. It was fun painting with you all. Look forward to seeing what you all create. Good night.